Good morning, everyone, and welcome, and congratulations for getting here on time. Not like I, who was an hour behind, so I had to rush to get here. But welcome, dear friends. Welcome to our spiritual home, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Tarpon Springs. We are glad to have you with us today. My name is Barbara Rosen. I'm an older white woman with short white hair and green eyes. My pronouns are she, hers. I serve on our Board of Trustees, and I'm serving as your worship associate today. We are a church of many welcomes, and we offer a warm welcome to all of you. This is a liberal community for all ages, promoting spiritual growth, social justice, and the arts. As such, ours is an active church, and everyone is invited to participate in any of our activities. To learn more about events, our church calendar is on our website, uutarpon.org, or we'd be happy to talk with you during the coffee hour. Our children are with us during the beginning of the service at this time. We have faith formation programming available with our gifted leader, Jami, Cruz. Children gather for their time together with her after the story. If you'd like more information about our programming, please contact Reverend Kristina or see Jami after the service. For those present with us in the building, we have connection cards available in the pews near the hymnals. If you fill one out and put it in the offering plate or give it to one of our greeters, we'll be able to keep in touch with you. If you're watching us on Zoom or YouTube, you can send us an email at membership@uutarpon.org to get connected. There are also small cards to write any joys or concerns you would like to share with us if you prefer it in writing. Reverend Kristina Spaude will be leading the service today. She and Greg Rosasco will give part 2 of our service, Justice is What Love Looks Like in Public. Our music is provided by our music director, Bonnie Whitehurst, and our members of the choir. Again, welcome. Our opening music is Turn the World Around, number 1074 in the teal hymnal. Again, welcome.
And if you would like to stand, please do so. Otherwise, you may remain seated.
From the fire, living in the fire, go back to the fire, turn the world around. We come from the water, living in the water, go back to the water, turn the world around. We come from the mountain, living in the
I am the Reverend Kristina Spaude. I use she, her pronouns and am a white woman. I have chin-length curly brown hair, parted on one side with blue eyes. We always like to remember that here on the church, we are on the lands of the Tocobaga and Seminole peoples. Our opening words this morning come from Kathleen McTeague. These words are from the hymnal number 435, We Come Together This Morning. We come together this morning to remind one another, to rest for a moment on the forming edge of our lives, to resist the headlong tumble into the next moment until we claim for ourselves awareness and gratitude, taking the time to look into one another's faces and see their communion, the reflection of our own eyes. This house of laughter and silence, memory and hope is hallowed by our presence together. Come, let us worship together.
Good morning. My name is Betty Clark. We light our chalice with these words from Judith L. Quarles. At this hour in small towns, big cities, single rooms, and ornate sanctuaries, many of our sibling Unitarian Universalist congregations are also lighting a flaming chalice. As we light our chalice today, let us remember that we are a part of a great community of faith. May this dancing flame inspire us to fill our lives with universal Unitarian ideals of love, justice, and truth. I even have a green match.
And let us now sing hymn number 123 in the Gray Book, Spirit of Life.
Our story this morning is Frances Harper Bends the Ark by Sarah York. Sometimes freedom is a long time coming. It may take generations upon generations for justice to be won. Our Unitarian ancestor, the Reverend Theodore Parker, said, "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. From what I see, I am sure it bends toward justice." The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. often used this quote. Barack Obama, 44th and first African American president of the United States, added, "But here's the thing, it does not bend on its own. It bends because each of us, in our own ways, put our hand on that arc and we bend it in the direction of justice." The hands of Unitarian Universalists have been bending the arc for many years. You may have heard of John Adams, Susan B. Anthony, Christopher Reeve, or Rachel Carson. Have you heard of Frances Ellen Watkins Harper? Her hand was on the arc too. Harper was born a free black woman in Baltimore, Maryland in 1825. She was raised in the household of her uncle, an educator and African Methodist Episcopal or AME minister. He was also an abolitionist, a person who objected to the enslavement of blacks. Harper followed in her uncle's footsteps to become an educator and abolitionist. She also became a writer, publishing her first book of poetry at 20 and publishing the first short story written by an African American woman later in her life. Her writing often urged blacks, women, and people in oppressed groups to take a firm stand for equality. In 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act was passed. It became dangerous to be a free black person in Maryland because slave owners could claim black people were runaway slaves and force them into slavery. So Harper moved farther north to Ohio and then to Philadelphia. She taught, ran part of the Underground Railroad, and lectured around the country to bend the arc toward justice for African Americans. In 1863, abolitionists celebrated success with the passage of the Emancipation Proclamation. It did not immediately create a world where African Americans were treated equally and fairly, but it did make slavery illegal. Harper saw that there was still work to be done. She put her hand toward women's civil rights, in particular the rights of black women and the right of all women to vote. She co-founded the National Association of Colored Women. Again, she toured and lectured on the topic of freedom. Her lectures and writings spoke to the need for women to be free, to be more than wives and mothers. She understood what she was talking about. A mother herself, after her husband died, Frances Harper took her daughter with her on her lecture tours. During her justice work, Harper met many Unitarians also working to bend the arc. She felt at home with our liberal religious beliefs and knew that her work could strengthen the justice work of the Unitarians. She joined hands with them by joining the First Unitarian Church in Philadelphia in 1870. She frequently read her poetry from the pulpit of this church, yet she kept her membership and taught Sunday school at an AME church too. Harper died in 1911, before the 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote in 1919. This was a cause she worked hard to bring about. Yet Harper understood that her labors might bring about freedoms she would never enjoy. She said, "Apparent failure may hold in its rough shell the germs of a success that will blossom in time and bear fruit throughout eternity." Some of the fruits of Harper's labor and the labor of other Unitarian Universalists are enjoyed among us today. Yet we are not done. Oppression still exists in our world. Harper's hands, and Parker's, Adams, Anthony's, Reeves, and Carson's are no longer on the ark. Our hands are needed to take their place. May bending continue until victory is won. We will sing the children to their programming with hymn number 413 in the gray hymnal. And as we do so, I will light this candle to remind them that they are held in the love and strength of this community.
Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the light of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. Go now in peace, go now in peace, go now in peace, go now in peace. May the light of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.
Now is the time in the service where we take our offering for the work and welfare of this church. Ours is a free faith which must sustain itself financially. Please go to our website, uutarpon.org, and click on the donate button, or you may mail your offering to the church at 57 Reed Street, Tarpon Springs, Florida, 34689. For those of you with us in person in the sanctuary, place your offering in the offering plates as they are passed. The music now is "We Stand on Holy Ground."
We stand on holy ground. We stand on holy ground. Wherever on this earth we stand on holy ground. Each land is sacred land. Each land is sacred land. Wherever on this earth we stand, each land is sacred land. We cherish all that lives. We cherish all that lives. Wherever on this earth we stand, we cherish all that lives. Respect the web of life. Respect the web of life. Wherever on this earth we stand, respect the web of life. We stand on holy ground. We stand on holy ground. Wherever on this earth we stand on holy ground.
Before our reading, we're going to take a brief moment of silence to let you settle into yourselves and your seats. might take a few deep breaths down into your belly if that is comfortable for you. Our reading this morning is the June 23rd, 2021 edition of Braver, Wiser, a weekly UU devotional for reflection. This is Coalescing Around Whiteness by Takia Nur Amin. Begins with this quote from Micah, chapter 6, verse 8. "And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God?" Takia writes, "When President Biden was inaugurated in January, most of my white friends thought everything would be okay. I thought different. There's going to be a dialing up of white supremacist violence coming forward, I warned one friend. We're going to see more outrageous, violent stuff." I think all the time about the fact that we never properly discredited the Confederacy as a traitor government, and instead have allowed the symbols and rhetoric of the Old South to flourish in violent and historically inappropriate ways. We live in a myth that white people are innocent and rational and logical. It's hard not to be paranoid as a Black person because you have white people who say, "I would never do that. I'm one of the good ones." And you want to believe them. But history shows us that when it comes down to it, a lot of white people will coalesce around whiteness. For example, there are little offshoots of people who are protesting our Unitarian Universalist emphasis on racial justice. Well, that's fine, but don't call yourself a UU. Go be something else. I'm not interested in keeping people who aren't trying to be kept. When you say, "It has to be a big tent, everybody has to be in here so we can hold hands and sing Kumbaya," what I hear is, we want to make sure that the people who would take your life, who would snuff you out without consideration, get to be in here and hold hands and be affirmed. Do we who are UUs really believe in the values of our faith enough to enact to them in the larger world in bold, clear, and unequivocal ways? Because I'm telling you, after the things we've experienced in the last year, politically and socially, people are looking for bold, clear, unequivocal pronouncements. If we're going to say that we are a faith that is committed to justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, we have to do that. Her prayer. Spirit of life, help us release any impulse to make a mockery of our faith by simply going through the motions instead of living Unitarian Universalism. May we find the courage to live congruently with the best values proclaimed in our living tradition, and to embrace the divine invitation to bring goodness into the world.
Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship. Thus do we covenant with each other. Thus do we covenant with each other.
Two weeks ago, Greg and I led the service, Justice is What Love Looks Like in Public, which we did not realize was part one. But we didn't finish everything, and there was plenty of interest, so we decided to do a part two together. So picking up where we left off.
Okay. You guys shouldn't encourage me, you know. Last time we talked about love, the love that anchors our commitment to transforming the world through liberating love. I do see this as a significant shift in emphasis from our earlier emphasis on ethical living. For example, the current principles include love only tangentially in our second principle, which we quoted this morning. We covenant to affirm and promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relationships. One might argue that this is simply part of good behavior rooted in Western notions of ethical living and moral philosophy. I want now to turn to the way justice and equity are understood in the context of the proposed changes. Could I have my first slide from the last time? This is from the proposed changes, and it talks about the fact that we now have 6 values, all centered and powered and driven by the power of love. And I want to talk in particular about the 2 values called justice and equity, which are shown on the next slide. And there will not be a quiz on this, so you don't have to memorize it. I just let you look at it for a second. Justice, we work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive. We covenant to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression. We support the use of inclusive democratic processes to make decisions. So they're weaving some previous principles into that. And then equity. We declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. We covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities. Now, the story of my interest in the second principle, luckily for a lot of you, you weren't here when I went through all this with you multiple times, but I examined them from the point of view of philosophy that I was raised in. And for example, when I examined the notions of justice and equity in moral philosophy, that is ethics, I found myself engaged in what philosophers term distributive justice. In researching current thinking, I learned that John Rawls' book, A Theory of Justice, published in 1971, is arguably the most important book of American philosophy published in the second half of the 20th century. I know that most of us haven't read it. That's okay. He advances the notion of justice as fairness, with the caveat that the absolute position of the least advantaged of the group must allow equal access to all rights and social benefits. So this is the first question. How do you talk about justice and equity in the context of social justice and the principles and purposes of our liberal faith?
So I've talked about this before, but I don't talk about the principles. I learned early as a very new Unitarian Universalist when I was very excited about proselytizing our faith and told somebody about our principles, and they were like, I believe all of those things too. And they were a devout Catholic, and I was like, I don't know what to do with that. So that was the end of trying to use the principles to explain our faith. For me, the idea of justice and equity is about allowing it for people to live well enough to thrive to their potential. The idea of least advantaged groups being allowed equal access to all rights and social benefits, to me, goes back to the conversation that we had 2 weeks ago about intersectionality. My approach to justice and equity at this point in time is primarily informed by queer, Black, and Indigenous folks, and especially those who are disabled. One of the challenges that we come to with the ideas of justice and equity is that of the way that capitalism and white supremacy culture intersect with our understanding of social expectations and care. We come across the idea frequently of individuals working to overcome what are systemic failures. If you think about the children who create things and fundraise to make sure that their friends and frenemies in school don't go hungry. Why are we allowing children to go hungry at all, right? That's a systemic failure. So yes, it's laudable that the child has taken some initiative to be entrepreneurial and raise funds, but this is a system failure. There's no reason that in a country like the United States, any child should go hungry and that schools should withhold food and nourishment from children because of this. Some of this is an inevitable consequence of when corporations have been granted rights and privileges of people. The question of justice as fairness is striking to me because is justice as fairness? Is it justice as equity? If we think about voting, for example, we all have the right to vote, at least if we haven't been convicted of a felony. And yet how inaccessible have we made voting to large numbers of people for a variety of reasons, and continued to do so. So what does equity actually look like? Does that equity actually look like allowing people to have the same rights? Or does it mean enabling a system to support the outcome that we say that we want? If we perhaps changed our laws so that everyone got a mail-in ballot, and they had 30 or 60 days or whatever to return their ballots, would that be more equitable to allow everyone to actually vote than just saying that we have allowed everyone the opportunity to vote? Which also then leads me to the question of justice as fairness, justice as equity, or justice as liberation. How is it that we will all be free? What are the ways to achieve that? When I talk about UUs in the terms of justice and equity, I say that we mess up a lot, but at least we usually try. That probably sounds like an awfully low bar, but I will say that most people appreciate the honesty of the answer and the earnestness of trying. We talked a little bit last time, and maybe we'll get into it again this time, about the question of mutuality, and I think that that is one of the threads that's going to string through all of these. It's a reminder that we're all in this together. We're all heading toward the same end, ultimately, and it is our work to make the path as helpful and healthful and just as we can while we're on it. In our faith, Unitarian Universalism is rather unique. There's a spectrum of the way that religions are considered, from orthopraxy to orthodoxy. Orthopraxy is good practice, right practice. Orthodoxy is right belief. We all already know that Unitarian Universalists are not set on a right belief, right? We all have different concepts of a lot of different things. But we are much more invested in orthopraxy, that is, right or good practice. I bring this up because I think it's important to understand that we are different from other faiths in a lot of ways. And one of the reasons for that is because our Unitarian Universalist identity is still in transition. When I was in seminary, we used to talk about Unitarian Universalist identity on a regular basis. Unitarian Universalism has existed since all of 1961, although Unitarianism and Universalism, of course, stretch much farther back. But when we look at the principles, we see an evolution of how they have changed over time. And we'll be getting into this more when we do a service on Article 2 in April. But in 1961, when the two faiths came together, it was really important to them to not lose too much of the cores of their identities. And so when they created their covenant, they put together a set of principles, of which there were 6, and held on to them very tightly as the core of this new faith. And in 1985, a new principle was suggested, which was passed in 1987. And there have been no radical changes in those principles since 1987. And yet our faith has grown in so many ways from that place where we were, not away from, just grown from the way that you would hope and expect a faith to, any person to, any group to over the course of time. And so we have the Article 2 changes suggested now. I have often said that Unitarian Universalist identity, we come out of the Christian tradition, but we are no longer bound by it. I often say that we have come out of the Protestant tradition and we've protested so hard that we left. And understanding our faith is very similar to understanding the way that Christianity sort of extracted itself eventually from Judaism, right? When Jesus was alive, it wasn't like a sudden breach and everything just shifted. It was this long extraction process that took hundreds of years, and we are currently in that same place. As we gain clarity around who we are and who we want to be, and not just about who we have been, we come to where we are now. And so we have been wrestling with these questions of justice and equity and gaining more clarity as time has gone on.
Good, excellent. Thank you, that helps. Within that context of studying equity, and justice, I always got into the question of what do we owe the future? And I think by this I mean the future of humanity and the web of all existence. How would you share your thinking concerning justice and equity in the context of what we owe the future?
I think we often think about what we've inherited from the past and think that that's where our gratitude should be directed. It feels concrete and known. But I think that leaves it so that we forget that we are ourselves already the future that was planned and hoped for. We might consider investing energy in becoming good ancestors and not just stewards. For example, I have talked before about how I was raised in a world that doesn't exist. My grandmothers raised me to believe that justice and equity are possible for women, that if I wanted to do anything I set my mind to, it was open to me, and that I would be loved and respected and cared for. As I have lived in this life, I have realized that that world was the world that my family created for me, and not the world as I have experienced it. And so it is important for us to make space for the people who aren't here yet. Marginalized groups, but also those who will come and follow. That unfolding future that we dream about, that was dreamed forward for us, that we hold and carry. Some people will say that the past is past. It's not. It's present. We carry it in our bones and our blood. And if we try to ignore it, we will keep passing it forward. There's a story in different traditions that comes up about the remarkably old man who starts planting seeds on the edges of his property. And people say, "Why would you plant these trees? You will never see its fruit." He plants the trees for the people who will come after him. They too will be hungry and need to be fed. So the question of what do we owe the future is very much the same as the question of what do we owe to each other. As I think about the TV series The Good Place, if any of you are familiar with it, the answer is that we try, and that we try everything. And that is what we owe to the future.
The last time we did address briefly this topic, but I think it's worth a more in-depth response. Previously, I noted that I have heard equity building described as, by many organizations working for justice, as a work of mutual liberation. Well, most of us can think through the liberation part. How can we deepen our appreciation for and sensitivity to the mutual part?
When the pandemic started, there was a thing that went around on all the social media things that was attributed to Dr. Fauci, and who knows if he ever actually said it, but it's existed for a long time, that I don't know how to explain to you that you should care for other people. I personally often find myself struck at the depth of obliviousness and inattentiveness of some people. When I think about mutual liberation, one of community organizing ancestors, Fannie Lou Hamer, comes to mind. She was a sharecropper turned community organizer. She was a political strategist, a gifted orator and truth teller as a Black woman. And one of her often repeated quotes is that nobody's free until everybody's free. She believed that regardless of our privilege and power within systems and our individual lives, that we all need each other desperately in order to keep being able to move and to grow forward. And so she worked hard to create social programs. She created a farm cooperative, increased Black land ownership in Mississippi, created a pig bank where people could loan out pigs and breed them. She created an incubator program for Black farmers and businessmen and offered financial counseling and scholarships for people in these transitional states of being. Her work is mutual liberation, that idea that you cannot simply get ahead by yourself, that you require being in relationship with other people. And just as you move forward, you should be reaching back to bring everyone else along with you. There's the quote, too, from Lila Watson, "If you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." One of the Aboriginal people in Australia. Our UU theology relates to this in some ways. Our overarching theology as universalists is that no one needs saving. We are all already saved. And yet, my experience has also been that we save each other every day. UUs are generally great at understanding the ideas of interconnectedness in the world in terms of biology, ecology, physics, but we don't always do a good job of it with people. I don't know how to explain to you that you should care about other people, but I'm just here to remind us all that we do need to. We need to care about each other. We need to care about the wider world. And we need to remember in this place, we are held by covenant, which keeps us strong and helps us remind ourselves of our mutuality.
Okay. When I wrote to you with all my questions, I said I was very honest about my history in justice activities and just in ethics. And I don't want to go through that detail with you guys, but I would admit it that only in recent years have I honestly and fearlessly examined my own thoughts, feelings, convictions, and the sources or roots of my activism for justice. What has been your path to discernment of a personally meaningful and ethical life?
I was raised to give back and empower others. I think specifically about my mother's family, prioritized volunteering, caring, listening to others. I remember going to my grandparents and my grandmother telling stories about when she delivered meals for Meals on Wheels, and she would sit with the people who were lonely and didn't have anybody else to talk to. And she would go to the hospital and volunteer, and she would paint the nails of women who were there to give them company and give them a source of pride to think about. For them, it was never simply about doing something. It was an act of being in relationship. Both of my grandparents were also educators and never missed an opportunity to share some wisdom with other people who were open to it. I have always been naturally curious and interested in people and how we got to be the way that we are. I have also done a lot of internal work to identify different blocks and barriers to myself, to my relationships, and to my ability to serve as a professional in the capacity as a chaplain and now as a minister for a congregation. My chaplaincy and ministry training helped largely because I was open to and already doing the work. Becoming a UU gave me a sense of obligation to do better in order to live out our faith. When I have at times felt unsure about the need to continue forward on the course, reminding myself about the importance of doing this work, not only for myself, but for those with whom I am in relationship in this place, within Unitarian Universalism as a whole, out in the world, reminds me that I am not doing the work for myself. I am doing the work for all of us. When I was in seminary, one of my colleagues, who I hold in great esteem, we were in the hostel together, and she was talking about a class that she was taking and lamenting some, as a Black person, about this class on grappling with questions around race. She said to me, "I don't think I can ever be my whole self around white people." And those words have never left me, in large part because I have known what it is to not be able to be my own whole self around people. And so, whenever I feel discouraged or frustrated or angry, I again remind myself that it is not just about doing the work for myself, it is about doing the work of being in community. And I have made a commitment to doing this work for the rest of my life. The question of ethics for me, about how to live an ethical life, is just about what it means to live in alignment with our values. And when we come to places where our living is not in alignment with those values, we make changes so that we live in a way that is more in alignment with our values. For me, I'm a very pragmatic person in that way. For me, it's just like, oh, well, I'm not doing the right thing, so I'm going to change course right now. I know that's not always the way for everyone, but when I think about what is important to me, it becomes a lot clearer about how to move forward and to make those adjustments.
Thank you. I have one more question. It has to do with intersectionality. It implies that people have multiple dimensions of experience and history on the part of those those rightfully included in our scope of concerns for harms and inequities. One of the challenges when encountering new areas and people within those areas is not to objectify, that is, make a subject of curiosity as opposed to a real person with much to offer in terms of relationships. My personal experience in the Black community is always revelatory, and when I truly try to connect, very meaningful. This is a new work for many, maybe for most of us, and work we may not be well prepared for. How do we help nascent workers for justice in intersectional areas or arenas to be effective and resilient?
For me, one of the things that has been most helpful is gaining an increasing and constantly evolving understanding of different systems of oppression, as well as our role and place in them as individuals, as groups. I have to remind myself and would encourage others to remember that anything that happens both is and is not personal. So you may be a person in a situation and it goes astray and you're very aware of that and feeling very badly about it, which is to some extent about you, but it also is not. It's about the system that's being played out at the same time. And so it's a little bit easier, I think, to not feel so lost in our own feelings when we can feel and understand that it's not just about us, it's about something larger than us that's happening. A reminder that we should all know we're going to mess up, probably a lot. If you're doing the work, it will get better, but it never goes away. I have been doing this work for over a decade now, and I still mess up. I still expect that I'm going to mess up. Still expect that it's going to hurt, and it's really going to be. But it's the commitment that I've made. A reminder that the arc bends only because people work to bend it. That on my worst days, they are never as bad as the worst days of people in more marginalized groups. Suffering is not a competition, but can help keep us focused and motivated. I know it does for me. Another idea that's important to remember is some of my colleagues and I have been talking about the idea of not just a relay where you're passing off to one another, but of a chorus. You don't all take breaths at the same time, right? Because we would all hear it and it would be weird. You pace them, you take turns, but you keep singing. That's how this work goes. We can't all do all of the work all of the time. We would just grind ourselves right into the earth, which will serve no one. But if we take turns and we do the work when we can, and we keep cheering each other on, that's how we keep moving in the direction of justice. That is how we keep bending the arc.
Well, I've had fun with this. I've learned a lot, and I'm glad you're with us. We're just starting this process, and I'm wishing us all good fortune. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. And if you would rise in body or in spirit and sing with me our closing hymn in the teal hymnal, number 1028, The Fire of Commitment. the gift of faith, Jean Harrison Newyar has written, in the lore of ancient China, there's a story of a philosopher who was asked, where is the road called hope? He replied, it does not exist, but as people move upon it, it comes into being. I invite you to continue moving forward on this path, this journey of love and justice and hope with me.
We are one, we are many in a welcoming place. In the deeds we accomplish, we find our grace. In a world connected by nature so vast, we now plant these blessings, may they ever last. We now plant these blessings, may they ever last. We are one, we are many, may peace be our guide, as we offer each hope, with love by our side, with the dreams of the future and the fruits of the past. We now plant these blessings, may they ever last. We now plant these blessings, may they ever last.
We hope that you found meaning in today's service. We close with these words from Melissa Jeter. We extinguish this chalice today, but we are illuminated by a faith that allows us to sit and think. In this quiet time, we can reflect in solitude, meditating on love, growing out of our comfort. Though we experience discomfort, we are excited to give birth to a new, just world.